Okay, I think we should start. We've lots of people who have already joined, and probably a few will also keep joining in the next couple of minutes. But thank you, all of you, for joining this consultation, or as Peter said, it's a conversation. I think we want to do it as that. The whole idea of doing this series of webinars was to build a momentum and get more attention to canal irrigation, which India and many other countries have heavily invested in. But as we were discussing with Peter at the last IWMI-Tata partners meet, there seems to be a declining interest both from policy as well as academia towards this very relevant topic and very important topic of research. We will kick off this series with what will hopefully be a provocative talk by Peter Malinga. I think most of the people who have read anything about canal irrigation know Peter Malinga very well. But I will still take a minute to introduce Peter. Peter is works on water governance, policy, and politics. He's associated with the SOAS at the University of London, as well as the Center for Development Research, ZDF, at Bonn University in Germany. I grew up reading about canal irrigation, reading some of his work for now more than 20 years. What we want to do, and he's also one of the founding editors of Water Alternatives, which is an online open access journal. What we want to do through this series is learn about what people are doing on canal irrigation, both in research as well as in practice. The format that we'll follow is that in each of these series, which we want to do one every fortnight, there will be a presentation, a keynote presentation, followed by a response from a discussant, and then followed by an open conversation also with the participants available. Just a quick note for all the participants who are joining us online. Once you are in, I would request you to please mute yourself so that there are no background noises and that don't disturb the main conversation. And then if you want to ask a question after the presentation, then just raise your hand and then we'll call on you one by one for your conversations. We hopefully will have enough time for the detailed conversation about this presentation. So with these few words, I'll now hand over to Peter to start us on this journey for rethinking canal irrigation. Over to you, Peter. And we also have Professor Tushar Shah, who is going to be the discussant for the day, who has joined us. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Shield, for that introduction. And thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to open this series. A topic obviously close to my heart, canal irrigation. And so I'm very happy to, whatever it's worth, to have my contribution today, make my contribution today. I pretend to be in India, in Gujarat, even with my background photo and the cover slide. But that's actually not the case. I'm talking from the Netherlands. But from next Tuesday, I'll be in India doing fieldwork on canal irrigation. So once in love with canal irrigation, I've never given up over the past 30, 35 years. And I think we almost have two keynotes today because I'm sure that Tushar will bring a very interesting and different perspective because we know that we like to disagree on the question of canal irrigation. So I hope it will be an exciting seminar and an exciting conversation following these inputs. And I'm sure I will learn a lot from people from other regions of India that I work in and other perspectives that people bring to this conversation. So let's try to make it friendly, constructive, open, and exciting, and then we'll have achieved our objective. So let me start from here. This is the title, as you've seen in the invitation, Rethinking Canal Irrigation for Reframing a Repetitive Policy and Academic discourse. That's already where the first provocation comes by using the word repetitive. And obviously, given my work over the past decades, I'm talking. I must admit, I'll talk a bit more like an academic than a policy agent. It's almost unavoidable for me. So I hope there will be complementary views as well. But I'll try to say, of course, I there is a policy context also that I am aware of and talking about. So here we go. Uh, my introduction is very simple, which is also more or less in the invitation for this seminar series also. One can observe, I think, internationally as well as in India, that research and policy attention for canal irrigation uh, has declined over the past 2 decades, maybe even a bit longer. It's not kind of a a drop, but a gradual decline. It's no longer the sexy topic in rural development studies as it once upon a time used to be. A very central topic. It's no longer there, and it's very difficult to get funding for straightforward canal irrigation research. So that's also an indicator of that reduced interest, both I would say, both in the policy domain and in the academic domain, the research domain. Uh, there is a paradox there because obviously the fact that we give less attention to it doesn't mean that it uses less water or that farmers are less dependent on it or that it doesn't contribute to India's agricultural economy. Canal irrigation continues to use a very substantial part of freshwater diversion and extraction. Uh, um, so I think that in itself is almost a reason to not be satisfied with virtually no discussion on it. So I'm very happy that the IWMI-Tata program is taking up the glove, so to speak, to try and see whether we can discuss this in a new way in the present context. Now, so the topic of my talk is basically how to explain this paradox, and then subsequently the major part, how to respond to it. Uh, that is where I'll do try to say something of some originality. Uh, okay, so the question of why is it that that kind of canal irrigation has disappeared from the limelight in both policy. I'm not saying it has disappeared completely or that there is no policy attention uh, to canal irrigation. There clearly is, but it is kind of not very much in the in public discourse. It is, and certainly in academia, there is simply much less work on canal irrigation. We can see both internationally. If you look at what IMI works on, it used to be the main institute, international institute producing work on canal irrigation. It's very limited now in as far as I can see. So so why is that? Now, I've thinking about this. I've come up with five quite different reasons, not in any particular logical order, but I'll briefly talk about these. I think the first one on top is perhaps the most important one, at least in my thinking, is that there has been a general shift towards the urban in the political and policy domain. I mean, just as an anecdote, a sidestep, I was looking a few weeks ago at a handbook of political ecology that has recently been published. And these handbooks are these books where they have items on all kinds of topics to navigate the kind of overkill of publications that we have nowadays. And in that handbook, there was an item on water written by Alex Loftus, a well-known urban water scholar, works in South Africa, for instance. And the whole item was about urban water. There was nothing about agricultural water. So I think in the minds of many people nowadays, water is about urban water issues, and the irrigation and more generally the agricultural water issues seem to have taken a back seat. And urban is no longer only about mega cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore, which was kind of the beginning of urban water studies very much and still is here, but we're now also talking urbanization in, let's say, smaller towns and regions. The rural areas are also urbanizing. So the policy attention is very much to urban issues nowadays, also in India, and it's not the only place. Uh, Second reason is uh, that there may be, I suspect, policy fatigue in the field of canal irrigation reform itself. Uh, and perhaps regarding agricultural water policy more broadly. We've had several decades at reform. I mean, the 1990s, I've been working on canal irrigation since the early 1990s. The 1990s was a decade in which a lot of irrigation reform, debate, and practice took place in India. And so we're now 30, 35 years down the line. What is there to show in terms of actual concrete transformative change in the canal irrigation sector? And I mean, blunt answer would be rather little. And I think that is, we've also written about that with others in kind of the Millennium Ecosystem, not the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, the Water and Agriculture Assessment that was headed by David Malden, the Comprehensive Assessment of Water Management and Agriculture, something like that it was called. And there, Doug Mary, Ruth Weinzendik, Ayman Khan, and I, we wrote a paper more or less at the same point then. Irrigation reform has basically not achieved what it was set out to achieve. Uh, uh, and when I now reread canal irrigation literature from the 1980s and 1990s, the first impression is that much of it is still very relevant. I mean, it is not. And that's probably not a good sign in terms of irrigation reform. So I think there is a sense, not just academic fatigue in the sense of what else can we write about canal irrigation that we've not already written, but also policy fatigue in the sense of the irrigation reform seems to not have gone very far. Um, Not that it has been given up. I mean, it is, I think, a routine part of, at least in when I look at Glasgow, where we've done fieldwork last year, particularly. I mean, you can't see an irrigation policy text without reference to participatory irrigation management and water use and assurance and all the rest of them. So there has been a kind of an internalization of the vocabulary and partly the practice of the reform debate, but what it means in terms of outcomes is a very different question. So policy fatigue is the second. Third reason is, and this is much more speculative and a little bit devious towards my critical water studies colleagues. Um, um, I also suspect that among the more critical constituency of academic researchers, the political ecologists and critical water studies, the people who publish in water alternatives, uh, and among the NGO community, there is maybe a sense of relief that canal irrigation has lost the limelight. Because in that constituency, in that epistemic community, canal irrigation has often been associated with undesirable high level intensity green revolution agriculture, projects of modernization, state modernization, as and cause cause of a lot of agricultural water pollution, for instance. So it didn't have a good press in the canal irrigation. Generally, never had a good press in that community, and maybe there is something. Those who believe that in, let's say, local forms of development were never very enthusiastic of uh, about canal irrigation. Perhaps they feel that it's a good thing that we pay this attention to it. I'd be interested to hear comments on that, particularly because it's a a speculative argument. The fourth reason is, and this then we come into more in the analytical domain also, and in the domain of political economy. I think what is in my own thinking at the moment, I would emphasize that what I've called here the shift in the economic base of political power. I think something has changed since 1990, since liberalization. You could start it, could say, in the way governance works, how in the way politics works. Uh, uh, to put it very directly, as we know from Robert Wade's work in early 1980s, the irrigation sector was an important sector in that period for the practice of rent seeking, funded elections, and political parties. I mean, the famous article on the system against corruption the market in public office. I mean, in these two papers, I think are still signature papers about the system of governance in the irrigation sector in India and elsewhere. So I think one of the effects of liberalization and the economic growth and change that has happened afterward is that rent-seeking opportunities have immensely increased in that period outside the public works irrigation sector. So where in the in the 1980s you could argue that public works irrigation was a crucial sector for supporting the particular the functioning of the political system. I don't think you can argue that anymore in the same way. And if only because the corporate sector has acquired has grown and expanded and has acquired a very strong role in political terms as well. And you can see Gujarat is a prime example of that. It is a much more common thing. So I think the kind of puts the irrigation sector in a very different position and makes it less important to the powers that be at state level than it used to be in most cases. So, and fifth and last, and that is perhaps related to the previous point, I would suggest that the changed role of agriculture in India's political economy is a fifth reason. Now, that is also a sketchy point that I'm making here, so I'm very interested in what others have to say here. What I mean is not just that because urban things have become more important, agricultural, rural things have become less important, but more fundamentally, I think the role, the position of agriculture in the overall political economy has changed. There was a time when agriculture was considered one of the main engines of growth of the national economy. I mean, in Marxist economics, you would say uh, it provides the surplus that was going to fund industrial development. So, kind of a view. Um, uh, but basically, standard economic theory about the role of agriculture in the development process. I would say now that is no longer the case, or much less the case at least, and almost agriculture has become partly become what you could maybe is a sort of a social and welfare sector, where that sounds odd perhaps, but what I mean to say is that it's of course it's very important for food security. There's no doubt about it, but the national engines of growth, economic growth, are elsewhere, mostly. And rural areas harbor, again, what Marxist economists would call the reserve army of labor. It is a reservoir of small, marginal, uh, poor people. Not only that, of course, but those, some would say, those who have not migrated yet to the urban areas. We are exaggerating, but uh, and let's not forget that many rural elites over the past 30, 35 years um, have developed partly or largely urban-based livelihoods, uh, and by starting businesses and by educating their children, etc. So there has really been a shift as far as I can see. We've seen that both in Karnataka and Gujarat, where I've done fieldwork, very, very clearly. Uh, and for example, in our fieldwork in Gujarat, I was struck by how important sharecropping has become. Absent landholders who then poor people from tribal areas and other areas move in to cultivate the land basically on a scale that surprised me. So not very well researched yet, but I think there's something there. And average landholding size in India has also not increased as far as we know. So all of this justifies a more welfarist perspective on agriculture, I would say, with subsidies, fees, and loan waivers. These were always there, but in the present context, political context, that is even more so, and there is less and less incentive to think about cost recovery and kind of agriculture as an engine of growth. And that also puts irrigation, not just canal irrigation, but irrigation in general, in a very different context. So that's my uh, small efforts to kind of trigger your mind, and hopefully all of you who participate will bring in other and different additional and different perspectives on this. But I think it's an interesting question why the shift has. We have to understand why the tension is declining and what that tells us about the changes in the Indian rural and overall scenario. Okay. Now, let me then shift to the main topic. Well, of course, it's tempting to revert to existing discussions on canal irrigation as at face value, as in outer appearance, not much seems to have changed. So the danger is that we rehearse all kinds of existing debate, but I will argue against that. But so I'll try to my only piece of empirical illustration in this talk is this. Uh, and I just want to illustrate this point. At face value, things seem to be the same, but actually the context in which we operate has qualitatively changed. That's basically what I'm trying to convey. So these are two maps, remote sensing maps of my favorite irrigation system, the Tungabhadra left-bank canal, where I first did field work together with, I think he's in the room, Doreswamy, and last year we did fieldwork first together in 91, 92, and my PhD came out of that, and we've done a restudy more or less last year, 2024, with his team in the Vijayanagar Channel's modernization project, and so the data comes from there, and we'll hope to publish that restudy in the not so distant future. So credits to that to their team for the data collection. Now, what you see here is two maps. One of the whole system, the left bank system, with the reservoir in the bottom left corner, and then the top, the upper black line is the canal, and the lower black line going to the right upper side is the river. We're talking about the river. The right picture is one of the largest distributary secondary canal in the system, distributary 54. So now what can you see on these maps? And I think just to illustrate what may or may not be happening in canal irrigation systems. What you see, the yellow in these maps is rice cultivation, which requires a lot of rice. All the yellow is rice. All the green is classified as irrigated dry crops. It basically means we're in Kharif season here on this map in the rainy season. So it basically means there's a rain-fed crop on this land, which may or may not receive irrigation water. And then if you would look at the Rabi, the dry season maps, then you would also see a lot of brown, and that is fallow. But in Cardiff, you can see that most of the land is planted, rainfall or irrigated. But you see, there's several things you can see here. It's immediately striking that the rice cultivation is concentrated in the headlands of systems. This is a well-known theme, of course, for long in canal irrigation. So you can see the head end of the main canal as well as in the head end of a distributary. Now, what we have observed and still have to kind of evidence in more detail is that this concentration has increased over the past 30 years. That you can't see that in the map of procedure flow, but if we compare this with 1991, 92 data, we clearly see a geographical shift in where the water goes. And we think we also see concentration in not just geographically, but also in terms of the percentage of water that goes to rice cultivation. It may be as high as 80% or more. So what has happened over a period of 30 years, while water distribution was still highly contested in the early 90s, it now seems a done deal that almost all of the water goes to rice. Uh, and it's and that's exaggerating a little bit only. Now, so I think that's an interesting shift. The second thing you can see is that there's a lot of yellow along the river. Can you see my cursor? This is the river. I'm not sure you can see my cursor. But this yellow along the river is all lift irrigation. Mostly individual lifts by farmers, but also some larger lift schemes by government. Yeah. This is a hard rock, black cotton soil area. There's hardly any tube well irrigation because the groundwater is alkaline. So if you want to supply beyond the canal, you need to lift it from somewhere. And this is massively lifted from the river, as we can see on the map. So what that illustrates is, I think, a typical policy response that we've seen. Rather than reforming the distribution partner, and so addressing management and governance, what you do as a governor and as a politician is ask yourself the question, can I find extra water to bring to the scheme? And this extra water here is lift water in the river that you can lift. And some of the larger drains also, but mostly from the river. Now, for example, last autumn, this is from 2018-19, but last autumn, September, October, so when we were in the field, a big lift irrigation system in the tail end of this distributary 54, which you see on the right picture, was inaugurated, commissioned, it started flowing. But you basically build a huge pipe to somewhere upstream in the canal system, and so we'll see that a larger part of the tail end of the distributary 54 that will become irrigated and probably with rice. It would be likely. So that's the policy response. Bring extra water. And if you can no longer find it, there is a real issue in terms of what to do next. The second response, which you can't really see on the map, but if you would look at Google Earth, you would see an explosion since maybe 15 or 20 years. We looked at this system also in 2015, and then we didn't really see it yet. But now we see a massive number of farm ponds that have been dug at farm level. In Google Earth, you can easily spot them because they're nicely dug. And there must be thousands of them across the scheme. So a farmer response has been to store water in the rainy season and then use it in the dry period. So we've not seen systematic research on that, so we know rather little on it. But that's another kind of physical response to the system, but by the farmers. And the last thing is perhaps an interesting thing that you can see. If you have somewhat telescopic eyes and you would look at the map very clearly, and you look at the Gangavati Kanakagiri Sindanur stretch on the left bank main canal, you see that there is yellow on the left side of that canal, and that yellow should not be there. It's not an error of measurement. What we see emerge is extra people lifting water from the main canal on the upper side of it, because this is a contour canal and there was no irrigation plan whatsoever on the upstream side of the canal. But now, since a number of years, we see that. We are trying to estimate. It's not easy to measure, but the rice area seems to be several 10,000s of acres. Or maybe even hectares, we can tell precisely. Very substantial. Why? How is that possible? Because it's formally illegal and against the policy, and also relatively new. I think what people report is that there are many Benami land holdings of political leaders here, political representatives, and that protects the formerly illegal form of irrigation. So it contributes to further concentration of the water. So that's, I think, a snapshot of a pattern. Now, what to say about this? Well, so partly it is new, but it isn't that new. I would say that these are changes of degree and the continuation of a pattern and a process rather than qualitative structural changes. Uh, let's say that the pattern is increasing appropriation of water by a certain group of people, and now finally leading also to very evident geographical and social concentration. Now, yeah. So that, and the same is true for the institutional arrangements. They're not that different from, let's say, 15 or 20 years ago. Uh, there is one change that really struck us in the fieldwork is that a somewhat alarming reduction of field staff present in the system. That was really remarkable to me, for me, that the level of government state official presence in the system has really gone down remarkably strongly. So the primary change in canal irrigation, I think, is not this empirical pattern. Even when, as an irrigation scholar, I find this all very, very interesting. Uh, for me, the primary change is the context in which this all exists. The broader context of agrarian livelihood strategies, of agrarian relations on one hand, and the role and let's say the governance system, the overall governance and political system in which this is situated. I think that's where the changes are. And in generally speaking, I would say if you want to rethink canal irrigation, you one of the important new things to do is to rethink the impact and the implications of this new context in which uh, apparently at face value similar irrigation practices operate. That would be my kind of message here. Um, so I think we need to think, if we want to rethink canal irrigation, we need to think about two things. I would suggest. Oh, sorry. The reasons why the reform paradigm of the 1990s has produced not much of a transformative outcome. A lot of that work has been done. I think it would be worthwhile to revisit that. But for today, the second one is the more important thing. How to reframe the role and challenges in the role of and challenges in canal irrigation in the present changed conditions. I think that would be is work that has hardly been done. Well, uh, I think that would possibly lead to either new approaches or different perspectives that might be of interest also to policy actors and just to economic scholars like me. Now, to organize that rethinking, I'm suggesting three themes for this reframing. Um, and I've labeled them as follows. From canal water distribution and management, the focus of the 1990s, towards regional water governance and planning. I think one shift that I would suggest, one theme that I would suggest to think about. The second theme is from PIM and water use associations, the dominant theme in irrigation reform discussions, towards multi-level governance. And the third avenue or theme from agricultural development towards rural change, where irrigation was usually discussed in the past as part of agricultural development strategies. I think we now need a much broader perspective on rural change and perhaps even questioning these words, rural and urban, and all of them. So these are the three themes. I'll briefly talk about each of them and then give the floor to Shah. And here we are. From canal water distribution and management towards regional water governance and planning. So the basic observation is, which is not new at all, is that canal water is only one of several water sources in any given region. Whether it be lift, like in Tungabaga, or well irrigation, or watershed development, until wastewater from cities. There are multiple water sources And I think the idea that we have to look at water systems rather than the sub components of that in isolation is basin approaches, all that I think is reasonably well established conceptually, but not so much in actual water governance practice. I experience the water sector in India still as relatively fragmented institutionally. So, uh, so we also know that these uses are increasingly connected. I mean, cities are taking water from agriculture, and cities usually win in that contest. Even in Tungabhadra Left Bank Canal, which is in a quite remote rural area in some respects, there is an increasing number of water supply extraction points for cities and towns along the main canal. And there are all kinds of other forms of connection between different types of water use. Of course, the conjunctive use of well and canal irrigation is a very old one, but I see we are basically getting an ever increasingly integrated water system. Another point. Also, not a very new point, but again, not very recognized in policy discourse, in practice. Um, and existing, as I've already said, existing institutional arrangements are still organized subsector-wise, and one could argue that is increasingly a problematic misfit. And I think I'm inclined to agree with that, with people who argue that. The question then becomes, how can we look at water from a regional perspective? I'll avoid the word integrated because IWM doesn't have a particularly good press and has become kind of undermined as a policy idea very much. But I think this idea of regional water systems is something that we need to think about much harder, both in an analytical sense, because also academia is quite separate. Some people look at soil and water conservations, others look at urban water supply, others look at canal irrigation. So even on that kind of analytical level, there's work to be done, I should think. Um, uh, so so that is kind of water in a landscape. That is, I think, not a very original idea, but it's something that we should push more from as canal irrigation community as well. At the same time, I would say canal irrigation is often I don't have the right word yet, but I've called it here the organizer or the grid of a region. If you look at the Tungabhadra left bank canal as an example, this used to be in one district, Raichur district. It's now the district has now been split, but it's two districts. But basically, this canal system that has been implanted on that region has organized the regional economy, has heavily structured the regional economy. It has created new physical connections, new economic connections, new social connections, also because there's been in-migration from farmers. Uh, uh, and it has very direct links with state politics because of the kind of presence of irrigation staff and the political importance of irrigation, etc., even when it has declined. So I think the there is a sense in which canal irrigation systems kind of create regions also, economic regions. And I think the Tungabhadra left bank canal is an example, and I think SSP in Gujarat, you could possibly also look at that, uh, perhaps in that way. So I think there is that's a perspective on canal irrigation and what the role does it play in kind of structuring regional development, economic development, and other forms of development. I think that would possibly be the way into that analysis, and that is specifically focused on canal irrigation than just doing a regional water study. Um, the question I have for this theme is should the regional perspective be expanded further to water, food, energy, climate? Because if you once you start to say like things are connected and integrated, you tend to end up with we should study and address everything that is connected to everything else. Now, so how do we do the demarcations there in terms of scholarship as well as policy? initiatives. I think I'm ambivalent about that. I think there are advantages to. There is such a thing as a water sector, and as long as the water sector is as water focused as it is, I think you would have to produce scholarship also that specifically addresses water concerns. The flip side of that is that you leave out certain other things. So, like for example, in regions where there's a lot of tubal irrigation, you cannot leave out the energy question, as Tushar will undoubtedly agree and further illustrate. Uh, so it also is slightly context dependent, but I'm not altogether sure where to go. For example, in my own research, with how to how big to make the canvas for looking at canal irrigation. I think that's an interesting question that may have different answers in different regions. Uh, so I'll be very happy to hear your thoughts on it. It would be greatly interesting. So that's the first thing. Uh, and of course, in India, there is not something really like regional land use planning or regional spatial planning. So I think it's basically about that part of, and from a government's perspective, it is about how there is a logic for it, a kind of an objective logic for it, given the way the water systems are developing. We don't have it institutionally. So, what research and what initiative do we undertake to kind of push the system perhaps in this direction? It would be my interest there. So, well, theme number two, or avenue number two, from POM to multi-level governance. Well, I think we can go back to Robert Chambers. Partly there's nothing new here. Robert Chambers already in the 1970s and 80s said, uh, the missing one of the missing elements in irrigation discussions and policy is that we're not discussing main system management. We're still, while the assumptions that the causes of problems are located at the same level as the manifestation of these problems. So you see unequal distribution at the local level and you intervene at the local level. That may be an analytical mistake because the cause of the problem may actually lie in at main system level or even at other levels. So that argument is very old, was not taken very seriously, I should think, in the irrigation debate. The system, both research and policy, uh, uh, heavily focused on local issues, also in canal irrigation. So I call that the fallacy of localism, which we see much more broadly in rural development research. Talked about it yesterday in a different context. So I think I would say, the question to ask is what are the characteristics of irrigation government system as a whole, as a multi-level system? Now, uh, uh, and this is the only place where I give an academic reference. I found this paper by Kelsall and others on political systems, politics systems and domains. So it's for African cities, a framework, an analytical framework for African governance in African cities. But I think it translates very well to any other governance context. And I found the heuristic very appealing, and the kind of way they framed it. No detail here, but what it basically says, if we want to understand the governance system, then we have to look at least three levels, what they call politics, systems, and domains, and what I call here state level, system level, and local level. Not exactly parallel, but almost parallel. So apart from the local level, where we have the micropolitics of unequal water distribution, of maintenance, modernization, I don't know what, in the triangle of farmers, officials, and political leaders. I mean, that's what my PhD is about. The 1991-92 research basically documents that in detail. That's the micropolitics of irrigation. Then at the system level, we have, let me take the Tungabhadra irrigation system level here. We have the power block at the irrigation system level. There's such a thing as the Irrigation Consultative Committee, that which has representation of MLAs, the departments, and one or two farmers, where farmers are systematically kept out when they claim more greater representational role. So that is the institutional nexus where finally system issues are addressed, particularly in crisis. And around that, you have a kind of cluster of business interests, particularly rice milling in Tungabadra, agricultural, agro industry, kind of, chemical suppliers, etc., the fertilizer suppliers, etc. So I think that is kind of the power block at the regional level, the system level for this particular irrigation system. I don't know. I can't think of any academic papers on systematic analysis of how that enables and constrains irrigation management reform at that particular level. I I haven't done it, I must admit, for Tungabadra also, but hope to do more of it in the upper what we're working on. And then the third level, the state level, is what they call the political settlement. So they ask the question at state level, whether it's a federal state or a national state. Um, there's always an elite configuration of interest. You can also call it the elite bargain of the political settlements that enables and constrains, that puts boundaries of what can be done and what cannot be done. And I think this is where the big change under liberalization comes. That elite configuration of political parties, business interests, and the bureaucracy, perhaps. How does that? What is the logic of behavior of that system? And some of you will know famous Pranab Pradhan's book on the political economy structure of India, and in the planned development area, that elite configuration was very clear. With liberalization, it has shifted, and that's where we see the shift to the urban and the, let's say, private business. So kind of a real qualitative shift, in my view, in the way state politics is configured. So the point is not that these levels exist, but the point is to analyze how do the interconnections between these, how do things move up and down, so to speak, in governance terms, and uh, uh, constraints and enablements via certain policies accepted but not implemented. How does that work? And I don't think that in the Indian context or even globally we have much in-depth analysis of this uh, uh, at all. And the promise there, though I'm not overly optimistic, is that if you do such analysis, you may also think of alternative. Uh, where do you enter this system if you want to change it? I mean, that would be the policy benefit. Uh, uh, and I would hope, and that's basically a hope, that if we do this more thoroughly, more in detail, that we would discover some of these other perspectives. Because now there is a kind of a conspiracy of silence, I think, in irrigation literature on these two, the state level and the system level. We don't have much on that in the academic literature. Uh, so I think that's a gap, definitely. Uh, Now, and then the third one, quickly, from agricultural development towards rural change. Uh, I think one of the things that has struck me in the field work in the past year or so, 1.5 years, is that, which all of you know much better than I probably, that agrarian livelihoods and agrarian relations have changed quite significantly over, let's say, the past 15, or I can look 15 years back and I can look 30 years back for my favorite case study, but there's a definite change. And these have to do with many things. One of the kind of simple things that struck is the kind of persistence of farmers that there is no future in agriculture. Now, I think that has, for their children particularly, and that is, I think, there's always been there, that there's a move out, desire to move out of agriculture, but we found it in fieldwork very, very good. Uh, so that signifies something about what is happening in agriculture as a sector and agriculture production. And and I've already suggested that relations are also showing the prevalence of sharecropping. So if you want a very simple picture, which certainly doesn't apply everywhere and which you would have to fill in, then over the past 30 years, irrigation has functioned to allow the richer part of the rural population to accumulate and invest in urban focused livelihoods. Many of them have left, not fully left, they've kept the land, and they're now subletting that land to sharecropping and poorer sections of the population. So there's something is happening there, has happened there, or is happening rather, in terms of agrarian relations. Very likely to be regionally diverse and specific. So it's a rather grand statement, but it'll be very interesting to hear what different regional scenarios in this respect are. Uh, so farming is no longer what it used to be, if you want to put it very, very essentially in a very, very simplistic manner. And the same, I think, can be said about rural-urban relations. I think we really have to find ways to think about more creatively in relation to canal irrigation and irrigation in general about changing rural-urban relations. Translocal livelihoods. I think a topic very dear to me is what is migration due to this whole scenario? I think that would be a useful entry point. And I've framed it here as the last point, farmer mobility, which is, I think, not just in the sense that they uh, move out, but social mobility as well as physical mobility. And particularly Gujarat is a prime example with many people migrating abroad also. Uh, uh, and then labor migration. So I think the rural-urban relations is one avenue. And the last point, which I should have put here, I realize now, is the land market. I think that is also something through which at least in certain areas, the creation of special economic zones, the commercial zones, the Delhi Mumbai corridor, for instance, in Gujarat. So land, there should be a fourth bullet point here on the land issue where rural and urban are no longer as separate at all as they perhaps used to be in the past, or and again regionally specific. So I think we have to deal more consciously and explicitly with the notion of rural change rather than just agricultural development or agrarian. Not very common in the irrigation literature. So I conclude. Uh, so a very simple conclusion. I've tried to suggest three avenues for rethinking canal irrigation with implications for research analysis as well as typo policy. I hope that is not a Freudian mistake that I didn't type the word policy. Uh, the questions I have, and I hope you answer them in great diversity. The suggestion that I made fit in the diversity of canal irrigation system in India? Probably not. But then, what are the other aspects or experiences in different locations? So, what would you amend? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Can we ask Professor Shah to respond first before we take questions from the audience?
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. One of my major concerns when I was in IMI and after I retired from IMI is that while canal irrigation has consumed hundreds of thousands of crores of rupees in terms of investment over the past 45, 50 years, um, IMI is hardly engaged with the issues of canal irrigation and actually the larger question of the management of public irrigation systems. And I think this is an application that kind of uh, significantly reduces the space that INI can occupy in water research and water understanding in our country. I'm very happy that ITP has taken this initiative to bring canal irrigation back on the discussion table. It's something that was badly needed, and there is no better way to do that than to bring someone of the eminence of Peter Mollinga in this playing field all over again. I mean, he worked on canal irrigation in India in great depth in the 20, 25 years ago. And I think it's great to get him back to work on this theme. Uh, uh, in today's context, when uh, canal irrigation, its role, its significance have uh, fundamentally changed compared to the years when he did his seminal research in Tungabhadra. I think that the central question that Peter has identified, which is what has driven the decline and stagnation in canal irrigation in India. I think that's the central issue that we need to contend with. And besides political fatigue, I think it is the research fatigue. The fact that researchers have actually turned their eye away from this very important playing field. That's kind of what matters a great deal in shaping the discourse in this field. I think that Peter's formulation, his general formulation about why has canal irrigation come to the state it has today, and what can be done to reverse that? I think it's unexceptional. It's hard to disagree with that. But uh, I do think that there's an elephant in the room that doesn't show up in Peter's formulation. I think the decline in the significance of canal irrigation. Uh, there are there are a uh, number of indicators or trackers that suggest where it has come. Now, first, there are a number of surveys, the national sample surveys, many of which, especially the situation of farmers, agriculture in India, those surveys are repeated. And one standard question is that what has been your source of irrigation? And if you look at that data, and if you see what is the proportion of irrigating farmers for whom a public canal was the only source, in the 1960s and 70s, that proportion was something like 20, 25% or even 30%. Proportion of farmers who depended on canal irrigation partially, that is, they got use other sources, but also use canals, public canals, that number was much larger. That was about 60 or 70% of the farmers who irrigated. Now, if you look at the same numbers in the last 5 or 10 years, then you would find that no more than 3 to 5% of Indian farmers are able to depend totally on public canals for their irrigation needs. The proportion who depend on canals for one or two or three irrigations is probably much larger, maybe 15 or 20%. But the proportion who don't depend on canal irrigation in any way and who still irrigate their crops is 65, 70, 75%. So this is one major indicator of the declining relative and absolute importance of public canals in farmers' irrigation requirements. Today, a much larger number of farmers have access to irrigation than they used to have 40, 50 years ago. But a much smaller proportion of them depend on public irrigation systems, mostly public canals, for their irrigation requirement. The second very striking indicator is the size of the irrigation departments. There are states like Gujarat and Maharashtra and many others which haven't recruited irrigation engineers in 25 or 30 years. So basically, the irrigation departments have been completely depleted, and the irrigation public canal irrigation systems are ram barose. There is hardly anybody in charge of maintenance, operation and maintenance of the systems. Sardar Sarovar irrigation project, which is kind of among the largest irrigation projects in the world, almost all O&M except the headworks is farmed out to local level, poorly paid contractors who basically have no stake in a systematic management and maintenance of the tertiary as well as the distribution system. The third indicator is the budgets, O&M budgets of irrigation departments. You spend 50, 60, 70,000 crore rupees on building an irrigation system, and you have just 50, 60 crores per year allocated to maintain those systems. In civil engineering, the standard thing is that 3 to 4% of the capital cost is about how much you need to provide minimum, uh, resources to keep the system in functioning condition. And what most states are assigning, are allocating as irrigation O&M budget is paltry compared to that. It's kind of less than 1% or even 0.5%. And that is indicated, that partly explains why there is hardly any staff in the irrigation departments today. So I think the phrase that we use, there is a conspiracy of silence on what exactly is happening to canal irrigation. I think there are politicians and journalists who still believe that canal irrigation has the same significance to agricultural development as it used to have in the 50s and 60s. They believe that improving canal irrigation, the improving irrigation access is the only way of doing that is to build more canals. And therefore, although canal irrigation has reduced in its relative and absolute significance, the allocations to canal construction, new canal irrigation projects, so large canal rehabilitation and modernization projects, is still as high, as large as it used to be. And one major reason is the political economy of a different kind, that most politicians basically see building new canals as a way of distributing contracts to their political cronies. So the reason why kings and politicians wanted to build canals in the 50s and until the 50s and 60s was basically to gain political mileage among the farming communities. But today, the reason why politicians want large canal projects is basically because they can assign contracts to Rajshekar Reddy, the erstwhile the late Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, of United Andhra Pradesh, was the best example of that. Within 7 days that he became the Chief Minister, he announced. Hello.
Continue.
Yeah, he announced a multi 10,000 crore projects to build new irrigation schemes simply because that's the only way he can keep his MLAs on his side. So I think the political economy around canal irrigation has also changed. And one reason why this political economy is insulated from larger scrutiny and from farmers' ire is because farmers just don't depend on canal irrigation. What happens to canal irrigation doesn't really matter to most farmers. And I think there is a big big side of the underbelly of the irrigation economy in India that I didn't see reflected in Peter's analysis is basically the transformation of what is a public irrigation economy into an atomistic private irrigation economy. Every fourth farmer in India has his own tube well, and the two or three of the remaining ones, they depend on buying irrigation service from those. So there is an entirely new irrigation kind of arrangement that has emerged, which has actually made canal irrigation increasingly irrelevant and insignificant. There are three or four major factors that drove this. Number one, early years massive subsidies and bank credit and that were available for installing private tube wells. Number two, and the most important, is institution of a system of power subsidies, which uh, which made irrigation or downward private irrigation very cheap. So canal irrigation was cheap, but private irrigation provides affords farmer greater control, is of better quality, and is also as cheap as canal irrigation. Third is emergence of water markets. So I think if you compare 1970 irrigation economy of India versus irrigation economy today, then you find that the number of irrigation wells has jumped from around 1 million to maybe 30, 35 million. The number of diesel pumps, which offer good quality irrigation, but which cost a great deal to provide irrigation, has actually declined from about 30 to 15 million to nearly zero. There are many parts of India where diesel pumps were the mainstay of groundwater irrigation. But today you hardly find diesel pumps. And number of electric pumps, which use subsidized or free power, that has jumped from 1 to 25, 26, 27 billion. This is the heart. This is the main driver that has reduced canal irrigation to the state it is in today. The other major implication of the rise of this private irrigation economy is that it's become impossible to see how badly canal irrigation is doing. You go to any command area, and it's impossible for you to figure out how much irrigation is actually delivered by canals. It's very common in Gujarat, in Punjab, in UP, where you basically interview farmers in the fields, and there is a canal flowing by the side of the field, and farmers still irrigating with this tube well. This is a very common scenario throughout India. I don't think there is a regional dimension to this. It's kind of India-wide phenomenon. So I think it is basically this private groundwater-based irrigation, which is completely marginalized canal irrigation. The best indicator is that the rent seeking that Robert Wade wrote about among canal irrigation engineers. Nowhere in India today can you find those kinds of rents appropriated by canal irrigation engineers. And that is simply because the dependence on canal irrigation is nowhere nearly as critical as it used to be 40 or 50 years ago. So there has been a transformation of the irrigation economy in which canal irrigation has seriously lost out. And there is a problem of exit, voice, and loyalty. That if you depend on canal irrigation greatly, then you would try and defend, or farmers would try and demand improved management of water distribution. But nowhere do you see farmer mobilization for better management of canal irrigation distribution. And that is because they just don't depend critically on canal irrigation. I think this is what makes interesting areas or pockets where there is a resurgence of canal irrigation, where farmers are showing interest in canal irrigation that they haven't shown for 30, 40 years. The best example of that, Peter, I think you'll be pleased to know, is in Punjab. And you're going to Punjab next week. And I think it is in Punjab that you kind of see groundswell of farmer interest in improving canal irrigation, which is lying completely dead. 95% of farmers today in Punjab depend on private tube irrigation, when 80, 70, 80% used to depend on canal irrigation in 50s and 60s. But today, canals, although they are flowing, they have hardly any role in irrigation except recharging the aquifer. So it basically just provides recycling of water that tube wells pump. But it is in Punjab that you find Chief Minister talking about rehabilitating canal irrigation, because he knows that the groundwater crisis that Punjab and Haryana are facing, the only way they can face the challenge is by bringing canals back to the mainstream and getting farmers to depend on canals as much as they depend on irrigation. The second place where you will find canal irrigation taken seriously is in West Bengal. Why in West Bengal? Because there are no power subsidies there. Their farmers have to pay, if they want to use groundwater irrigation, they have to spend either on diesel, or they have to pay full tariff for power that they need to irrigate So here farmers demand, better canal irrigation service from the irrigation department. By far the best example of um, why canal irrigation has become insignificant is by comparing India and Pakistan. See, Pakistan has none of these factors that have marginalized canal irrigation. Pakistan still uses diesel for irrigation. Pakistan farmers who have electric tube wells, they pay 12 to 13 rupees per unit of power to pump groundwater. So there is much greater pressure on irrigation departments to do better O&M of the systems. The Abhyana or the irrigation service fees are collected, systematically, and the collection rate is very, very, very high. And most farmers depend much more on canal irrigation as well as on groundwater irrigation than is the case in India. The other example is Bangladesh, where there is no free power, no power subsidies. Wherever there are canal irrigation systems in Bangladesh, they are in a much better state of repair than they are in much of India. China, of course, is a classic example that comparing Indian canal irrigation systems with Chinese canal irrigation systems, we see a very vast kind of difference. So I think that the that the opportunities for reviving canal irrigation in India would come either from abolition or serious reduction in energy subsidies for groundwater irrigation, or to allow the groundwater crisis to deepen so much that farmers can no longer use groundwater. This is what has happened in Punjab and Haryana, that their farmers are not moved by the declining water tables and the fact that they have to insert new poles into the tube wells almost every second year. That doesn't bother them because they get free power. But now the water that they pump out is much more saline, and that is beginning to hit the yields and the quality of crop that they get. So now farmers in many pockets of central and southern Punjab are now demanding that canal systems be rehabilitated, that they have better access to better canal irrigation. So I think that the groundwater crisis will have to deepen further for canal irrigation to come back, or the political economy of power subsidies will have to change to bring canal irrigation back to its earlier significance. Thank you very much. I am very happy that we will have more opportunities to interact with Peter during the times to come. And I think that is absolutely critical that we get a handle on on this very important aspect of Indian irrigation and Indian agriculture. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Peter, it seems that one fatigue that is missing in your slide is farmer fatigue. And I think Tushar sir's note seems to suggest that there is also as much farmer fatigue from canal irrigation. They seem to have given up on canal irrigation as much as the researchers and the policymakers. So I'll let you quickly respond before we move on. There are some questions in the chat. I'll come to that. But if you want to quickly respond first.
Quick response, yeah. No, it's tempting to take long, but I won't. Because it's not the first time Tushar and I discuss that, and we usually have a number of divergences, which is always a very pleasant discussion. So I really enjoy that, but we'll continue that at some other occasion. So, yeah, but I would say I would fully support Tushar's idea of comparative analysis. We don't have enough of that in India and across India. So I'm a great advocate of comparative research. So I would hope that would be one scholarly way of academic way of pursuing this, and I think that would be instructive, really, so that we don't all talk from our own individual experience, but that we actually make an attempt to seriously compare these. I think it would be valuable. On farmer fatigue, I would say on that point, I think talk about a Lefferin Canal, which I've studied, of course, only one system, but it is a nice counterfactual on some of the Tushar's argument, because there is no tubewell irrigation to speak of. So there's no energy crisis. It simply doesn't exist. Very little tubewell irrigation, only in red soil pockets, which are very limited. And still farmers do not lobby for irrigation reform in any substantial way. So I think politically, I'm sure I don't disagree with Tushar that there is an important energy questions in the region in which it presents itself. But we need more explanation than that because and my argument would go in the direction for Tungabara, and I think it's general also one of it shows the mechanism of the division of the farming community. That the relationships within the farming community is one of the reasons why there are no greater demands on uh, on the, let's say, the state system to perform better. So I would that part of the political economy I would also emphasize. Not necessarily impressed also again with the by declining irrigated area in canal irrigation numbers. For Tungabara, that would simply mean that the irrigation has got more concentrated. So the problem there is not lack of interest in canal irrigation, but the problem is fewer and fewer people are running away with the water. So I think that would be and I think that's why comparative research is so important because these configurations will necessarily be quite different in different parts. Mine is a semi-arid South Indian bias, I think that would be really valuable if we could find a way to do more.
Okay, thank you. Um, I'll just read out some of the questions that are in the chat. Iskander has asked, dear Tushar and Peter, does also solar energy play a role in increased use of tube wells, groundwater, and in reduction of importance of canal irrigation? It's probably happening also in Pakistan now increasingly, and we have actually a student from IIT Delhi who's been visiting parts of Punjab where farmers are investing own money in installing solar pumps. So it's not just the subsidized solar pumps that are happening. Kuhelika is asking about one question I think that needs to be looked into is how to ensure equitable access when by design the distribution of water in a canal is going to put those along tail end or even away from the main and branch canals at us. Scheduling systems don't think really work. Compared to that, private tube well provides more timely access to water, like Tushar sir mentioned. I don't see any other. Okay. Harish Kumar is saying, thank you so much, Dr. Peter, for your insightful presentation. Two important developments in recent watering methods are groundwater and direct pumping from river. Both have increased because of free power supply and the subsidies. Still, Karnataka witnesses water user associations benefits and also significant role of canal irrigation in the tail end farmers. Strengthening canal irrigation is important because groundwater exploitation level has increased. So again, not a question. Seema Srivastava is saying, please also analyze the habitation's dependency on canal water along the canals. Rahul Mishra is asking, how is the widespread promotion and adoption of decentralized water storage structures like farm ponds reshaping the landscape of canal irrigation in India? And what does the shift reveal about the changing dynamics of control, access, and governance over irrigation water? So, a slew of questions, some responding to the points that have already been made, and some new points. We have another point from Dharai Swami asking, how do we understand the shift in academic interest in large-scale canal irrigation in the context of bringing back? So, back to you, Peter. Any specific response? I think some of this, I hope that we will also try and address in this series. But yeah.
Oh, well, Tushar can respond to some of it better than I can, but what I can respond to, these farm ponds are really interesting, particularly in North Karnataka, where they simply didn't, in 91, 92, we saw hardly any, and they were mostly for securing drinking water supply in summer for cattle and people. Now there are thousands of them, which are explicit also for that purpose, but explicitly meant to irrigate in Rabi or to save the tariff crop, depending on where you are in the system. So does that change the pattern of control? The honest answer is we don't know yet because nobody has nobody has even mapped the existence of these things. So even when you can see them on Google Earth, so we know very little about them. But what the impression I got during the field work was that, I mean, but again, the specificity of that system is that it has Andhra Pradesh farmers who have migrated into the system, and they've made. So for many farmers, it is who are more on the tail end side. It is a way to hold on to irrigated cropping by having a farm pump, and so then the struggle becomes in the rainy season, so to speak, who can get the water into the farm pump? Where the struggle earlier was who can get the water into the canal. Now we have an additional struggle who can get the water into the farm pump. And of course, you do that mostly on days when it rains and there's water in the canal that can't be stopped, and then you divert it. So it's not really a struggle, probably in the same way as, let's say, distribution in a peak period. But my impression, but it's only an impression, is that the same people are running away with the pond water as were with the canal water. So that it doesn't really change, let's say, the configuration of the farming community, the farmer irrigator community in terms of its social relations. And that is so it is decentralized storage, and it's not subsidized. It's completely farmer driven, and then you can of course get some maybe some subsidies now. It's like pump sets. They were a farmer enterprise, not a necessarily a government. And then there is government subsidies for electricity, etc. But the initiative, the agency, basically lies on the side of the farmers, not so much on the side of the government with these pumps. That's very clear. The habitations, I would say that's a good question. I will just say one sentence. I think that's part of the urban-rural thing. That siphoning water from irrigation systems for urban water supply must be increasing rampantly. I don't know whether anyone has counted or documented that, the scale of that, but anecdotally, I think it's evident, even in kind of a really rural area like North Karnataka, it's very clear in that is happening, and the towns always win, so to speak, in terms of redistributing water. So that's, I think, not very much research. There's some work on water moving out of agriculture, but it's and there's some work in relation to mega cities, as far as I know. But I think that it's part of this regional water perspective, and this is definitely one element of that. Probably more relevant in certain regions than others, but I would certainly support that should be an important part of the kind of reconsidering of a more regional water perspective.
Okay, I
I'll
think
stop there.
Professor Marotia wants to add some points. Professor Marotia, please, over to you.
No, thank you so much. I think most of the points Tushar has very well, covered. But very briefly, I would reflect on the current condition of the canal irrigation in Chhattisgarh.
So you're breaking up. We're not able to hear you. Professor Barotia, we are not
There
able to
was
hear you.
sisters.
Oh, I think he dropped out. We were not
The
able to
irrigation to the farmers during the
Yes.
Kharif season. The other tragedy is that due to this subsidy, as Tushar has mentioned, there is a enormous increase of the groundwater in the very high rainfall areas, and now even the summer paddy has been, promoted due to this. Due to, I would say, the kind of the very negative attitude of the water resource department. If they will maintain and restore the Water Users Association for the self-governance, I think there will be a new life to the canal irrigation, and the concern expressed by Peter and Tushar. I think this is the state where huge money has been spent. And if you see, if you do the survey, I have been doing this since 2005 to 16, and you can see the gradual deterioration. So there is a hope, provided we can create a political environment, and have the farmers very strong support, and the let us have the very strong political legitimacy kind of the component, so that the people who are in the power are willing to share their power with the farmers. So thank you very much, and I enjoyed the whole deliberation and the very good presentation of Peter. I am also glad that he has mentioned about the migration, because last time I heard him in 2017 in South China Agriculture University, where we had this migration workshop in South Asia. So thanks a lot, Shilp, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. I think there was some disturbance in the early part, but we could hear you towards the end. Peter, one question I had, just going back to the maps that you had shown, the predominance of paddy in the head end of the canal region. I think partly it is because of how you explained that the people in the head end are privileged and they kind of capture all the water and leaving very little for the tail end. But partly is it also a control issue that just even the head end farmers are helpless. They just can't control, and a lot of the head end land actually gets submerged, and the only thing they can do is paddy. So it's not by choice, but they just don't have control over the water that is coming from the canal.
True, of course. I mean, it's a system that then becomes self-reproducing also. But of course, it wasn't like that. It wasn't always like that. And it has evolved in this direction. And when we did fieldwork even in 2015, I think we have observations of where people still alternated paddy and cotton, and so there has been a kind of singularization of towards the paddy, and that has a lot to do, I think, with the economic and processing infrastructure in the district and the market system and the role that this particular area of the state plays in food security for Karnataka. So I think the clearest evidence is if you look at lift irrigation, individual lift irrigation. There's no particular reason why any farmer should necessarily grow paddy if he lifts water from the river, because it is for his or her plot, and it's not certainly in Arabi, it's not part of this kind of surrounded by other paddy plots necessarily. And still farmers preferably, but grow paddy if they can. So I think the answer is of the self-reproduction is not untrue, but I don't think it explains you have to have more of an explanation for this very, very strong preference for, and it has to do with regulated market price protection, the process. So that's, I think, an agrarian political economy issue primarily. And of course, this is an old debate as well. In the 1980s, we were already discussing the relative prices of wet and dry crops, and what a world of difference it would make if you would protect sorghum and millet crops rather than rice crops and sugarcane. So I think there's nothing new there. So agricultural pricing policy is one of the things that remains as relevant as it ever was. Not much movement on that front, as far as I can see. But suppose you would make rice paddy economically unattractive, that would probably solve quite a few water management problems in at least in that system. So yeah, so that would be my answer to your question. But definitely the reproduction mechanism is there. The most surprising thing we found is about in 2024, the level of production of this rice. Because we did I think almost more than 400 farm surveys. We finally did 450 or something across the system, and the yields were fabulous. So even our agricultural, I think 75 bags per acre or something, 70 to 75 bags per acre, significantly higher than when we last looked at that. 2015, and much higher than we found in 91, 92. And it was rather so. Even our agricultural economist in the team in that project said this can't be true. This must be a socially desirable answer. It can't be like this. So we went to check with farmers we've known for, particularly Doris family has known for a long time, and we looked at the crop, and it actually is homogeneous, and these yields are actually achieved as far as we can make them. And of course, so the level of expertise of profitable rice farming with high levels of input, etc., chemical inputs, etc., that's all there. And it's sustainable. It's been there now for 30, for some farmers, it's been there for 40, 50 years. So I think that while the prediction always is that canal irrigation, intensive canal irrigation exhausts itself, it exhausts the soil and then it will finally show yield decline. And I agree with the environmental impact. That must be quite horrible. Nobody's measuring the non-point source pollution as far as we can see. But yield-wise, I am hugely impressed. And not just in a few pockets, but quite generally. So I think that is also for agronomists, I think that would be a very interesting question as well. And it is a factor that reproduces the interest in rice cultivation because they know how to do it. Apart from all the labor and market and all the.
We have one more comment from Ankush Bambal. Water in the canal might not be available 24/7 or all year since it is discharged by the irrigation department based on the capacity of the dam, need of the crop cycle, as compared to the groundwater, which is available 24/7 or all the year, if there is good water table, so that farmers have freedom to irrigate according to their calendars and timelines. Is that one of the reasons for farmers' fatigue? The higher kind of control over when to irrigate.
I agree. I've always understood the attraction of tubewell irrigation as individualizing control over water supply. That's one of the major attractions of it for farmers. Of course, this is contextual because if too many farmers control too much of the groundwater, you start mining it, and you still get a collective action problem. That is, and that is the governance problem over extraction of groundwater aquifers. So it's finally not really individual, but that depends. If you're in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, that's a very different scenario than when you're in the Sabarmati Basin in Gujarat. So you can't answer that question really in general, but yes. Farmers would favor individualized control of water access. That is definitely true, apart from all maybe the economic attractions of free electricity and all that. So, yes. And the problem, the challenge of canal irrigation is that it necessarily requires collective action of some sort. Uh, and, uh, and yes, so that the shift to tube wells is not surprising in that sense. And you see it in Tungabara also, where there are no tube wells, basically. Then, if you can do lift, that's also a form of individual control of water access. So, yes, but individual forms of control always have limitations over time when too many people revert to it. And perhaps the over extraction of groundwater problem is as intractable as is the canal irrigation reform. But we basically don't have a governance solution for over extraction of groundwater in semi-arid areas. Yeah, that seems clear to me. So we're whistling in the dark there as much as we are about canal irrigation reform, as far as I can see.
Okay, so I see that there are still some comments and questions coming, which is exactly what we wanted. So thank you, Peter, for reviving a discussion and conversation around canal irrigation. But we will close now because we said we'll do this for 1.5 hours and we are already 6 minutes over. I'll give the last word to Professor Shah if he wants to have any concluding remark before we close. But we will have the next round in another 15 days or 2 weeks, and we hope that these conversations will continue. Professor Shah, the last word to you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think this movement from canal irrigation to groundwater irrigation is actually part of a much larger transformation that is going on in Indian agriculture. I think in general, water application has moved from gravity flow to lift. Even when it comes to canal irrigation, much larger proportion of farmers today depend on lifting water from main or branch canals than using minors and subminors for water to come to them by gravity. So we are moving from gravity to lift. We are moving from open channel to pipes. I think many more farmers, much higher, larger proportion of the land in India is being irrigated through pipe water conveyance than through open channels. Also, the summer crop has increased hugely in the past few years. And summer crop often is the mainstay of farming because that's where farmers grow cash crops. So irrigating summer crop is very, very important. And one reason why canals are losing ground is because they offer hardly any irrigation during summer. And as a result of all this, the old idea of command area is getting reconfigured. If you look at Sadar Sarovar project or many irrigation projects in Gujarat, you find that areas which are supposed to be non-command, which are kind of in the contour canals, the other side of the areas, now are being intensively irrigated by farmers lifting through pumps and taking water 2, 3, 4 kilometers away. So if you are able to map the command area of say Mahikadana, then it's very different today than what it used to be 40 years ago when the canal was first commissioned, because many farmers who were not expected to irrigate, they are now doing unauthorized irrigation by. So in Mahik main canal and branches, you find at least 50, 60,000 diesel pumps or even electric pumps and now solar pumps, which are lifting water from the canal. So I think it is within this larger change process that this dynamic between canal versus private pumps is playing out. Thanks. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, Peter, Tushar, and all the participants for your active questions and comments. And we hope to see you all again in the next session of this series. Thank you.